A massive Israeli military operation in the occupied West Bank enters a second day. At least 9 Palestinians have been killed in raids and drone attacks on the northern city of Jenin. More than 3,000 people have left their homes in the targeted refugee camp. That's according to the deputy mayor. Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, vowed to destroy what he called a nest of terrorists. DW's Rebecca Ritters reports.
We're inside Jenin. It's a city under siege. The streets here are virtually empty, and this is why. The sound of gunshots sending people running for cover as an Israeli armoured vehicle passes by.
This is one of the main city streets in Jenin City, just a stone's throw from the refugee camp where the main military action is taking place. All day we've been hearing rounds of live gunfire and explosions, and sometimes, as you can see, the violence spills out in the street. Every time a military vehicle comes through here, it's met with stones and Molotov cocktails.
At just after 1 a.m. local time on Monday, Israeli forces stormed the Jenin refugee camp in the occupied West Bank, backed by unmanned drones. A pre-dawn raid to take out what the Israelis have called terrorist infrastructure inside the camp. The resulting gun battle piercing the air during the morning call to prayer. The military later released these images of what it says are seized explosives.
In recent months, Jenin has become a safe haven for terrorists. From that safe haven, terrorists perpetrated savage attacks, murdering Israeli civilians, men, women, and children, as many children as they could find. As I speak, our troops are battling the terrorists with unyielding resolve and fortitude, while doing everything to avoid civilian casualties.
But Palestinian health officials say dozens of people have been injured in the assault, some of them seriously, meaning the death toll could rise further. With reports denied by Israeli officials that some ambulances were being turned away at camp checkpoints.
The Israeli raid today was a very tough one. It was tough for medics as well as civilians who are inside the camp. There are many cases of women who are suffocating, pregnant women. And we treated many people who were having panic attacks.
The current violence comes after months of escalating tensions, after a spate of Palestinian militant attacks on Israelis and attacks by Jewish settlers on Palestinian communities. The Palestinian Prime Minister described the large-scale raid as an attempt to wipe out the camp and its inhabitants.
There are dozens of injured people and they have destroyed the infrastructure and properties of innocent residents. This is an attempt to completely destroy the refugee camp and displace the residents.
Israel has vowed to continue its military operation in Jenin until calm is restored, a move that may only serve to harden the resistance of those who live here, fueling more rather than less violence in the weeks and months ahead.
And our correspondent, Rebecca Ritters, who filed that report, joins us now from Jerusalem. Rebecca, the Israeli operation in Jenin continued overnight. What's the latest?
Well, Terry, as we were leaving the area last night, we could also see lots of Israeli military vehicles also seemingly leave the area, and we were thinking perhaps things might be winding down, though the military did confirm that the operation would continue. It has indeed continued as we're hearing today. You know, the Israeli military describes this, as you heard in that report, as an extensive counterterrorism effort. The latest that we're hearing that happened overnight, the military located and destroyed an underground shaft that was used to store weapons, they say. They say a grenade launcher was also destroyed, along with confiscation of other weapons. Now, overnight, the death toll has also risen. Palestinian officials saying that death toll now at 9 people killed in this raid, now in its second day. But, of course, there are loads of people injured. You've got as many as 100 people injured, according to officials there, and some are in a critical condition, so it's very likely that that figure, that death toll, could rise. And, of course, as the operation is ongoing, we may see more deaths during this raid.
It's not just militants who are affected by this, of course. How are civilians in Jenin coping?
Well, it's a really difficult situation up there, I have to say, Terry. It's really dangerous. You saw in that report the shops, everything is, of course, shut down. You don't see many women and children on the streets. And we're not able to access the camp itself. It is a closed military zone at the moment. But for people living in there, all reports are that things are quite dire. We were getting reports yesterday that water, electricity and other services had been cut to at least parts of the camp. Now, when that was put to the military, they were a bit vague about it, saying that they weren't really sure. They did some checking. They said that, yes, that was indeed true, but that they were going to work to try and fix that. That wasn't part of the intended outcome. Now, we also have seen pictures of thousands of people leaving the camp. Last night, families, women, children leaving the camp, fleeing the danger. There were reports that it was actually an instruction by the military, though they have denied that, and it does seem that people are just evacuating for their own safety. They are going to be housed in nearby schools and parks in tents. So we'll be going to talk to them later on. You know, really the situation inside the camp is dire. We've seen pictures of roads being ripped up because, you know, the army says that there are explosive devices trapped under the roads. So many of the roads, I was just in Jenin a couple of weeks ago and it looked like an entirely different place from the pictures I'm seeing coming out of there. So in a place that was already pretty difficult for people to live in with pretty poor conditions, things are just getting a lot worse.
How long, Rebecca, is the Israeli operation expected to continue?
That's really hard to say at this point, Terry. Even when you put that to the military, they say, oh, it could take several hours, it could take several days. They seem very intent on achieving their goals. They say this is a counterterrorism operation and that they're trying to stop that area, that camp being what they say is a safe haven for terrorists. So just how long that will take or how they see that goal will be achieved is really hard to say. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu, you heard him speaking in that report. He had some really strong words to say about this operation. He is trying to balance members in his far-right coalition who have been calling for a wider operation in particularly the northern West Bank, particularly in Jenin, for some time, and particularly in the last couple of weeks, as we've seen, a rise in violence. And, you know, it does seem that he's trying to placate those voices. So just how long it's going to be until he or the defence services, the military feel like they've achieved their goal really remains to be seen.
Rebecca, thank you very much. How's our correspondent Rebecca Ritters in Jerusalem?
Joining me now is Stephen A. Cook, Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington, D.C. Mr. Cook, thanks for joining us. Israel said what it was doing there was attacking a command center for local militants in the Jenin refugee camp. What do you make of this claim?
Well, there are reports that there is a coordinating cell of Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas in Jenin. The Israelis believe that they have good intelligence and that this coordination center is essentially eyes and ears for those two extremist groups that keep an eye on Israeli troop movements in the area and that have thus far made it more difficult for the Israelis to engage in counter-terror operations, which is why they undertook these drone strikes inside the camp.
Now, the UN's humanitarian coordinator said that she was alarmed that airstrikes were used in this refugee camp, not only just because it's densely populated, but it's also a civilian area. What is your take on this?
Well, certainly, I mean, the Islamic Jihad and Hamas have often put themselves in the midst of densely populated civilian areas to create these problems for the Israelis. The Israelis clearly determined that whatever civilian casualties their drone strikes would cause were worth it, as disturbing as that may be, were worth it in order to destroy this coordination cell that they have detected. It's something that we have seen in the Gaza Strip over the course of the last 2 decades, but something that we have rarely seen since the end of the Second Intifada, the Israelis using airstrikes in the West Bank.
So it sounds like it's a situation of human shield, but you would still expect the UN to condemn Israel for targeting or bombing civilians, even though the Islamic Jihad was using them as a human shield, right?
Well, that is certainly the Israeli concern, is that Islamic Jihad and Hamas have used civilians as shields, and that the UN condemns Israel without necessarily condemning these extremist groups. It is an extraordinarily complicated battlefield for Israelis because of the densely packed Jenin refugee camp, where they are conducting these counter-terror operations. The expectation is among most observers that the civilian casualty count is going to increase. As much as the Israelis often say that they are trying to prevent civilian casualties, that number always seems to be considerable.
And let's look at the larger picture here. Israeli officials said that they have no intention of occupying Jenin, but there are reports that Israel intends to build new settlements in that area. So what is Israel's larger strategy here?
Well, the Israelis have recently announced that they will build as many as 4,000 new housing units within the West Bank. There is no evidence that they seek to attach settlements to Jenin or its immediate environs. What I think the Israelis are most concerned about is that Iran is seeking to coordinate with Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and Hezbollah in order to coordinate attacks against Israelis and provide these groups in the West Bank more lethal weaponry in which to attack Israeli civilian populations. A number of weeks ago, there was an attempted rocket attack from the West Bank onto Israeli population centers. That's something that happens routinely from Gaza, but has never happened in the West Bank. At a previous operation that the Israeli military undertook, a number of armored vehicles were disabled by a roadside bomb, which was similar to the kind of roadside bombs that have been used against Israel in South Lebanon. So the Israelis clearly have an interest from their perspective in disrupting this coordination. And Jenin, from their perspective, seems to be the central node of this coordination, at least in the West Bank.
Well, relations have also been disrupted, it seems. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has suspended contact and security cooperation with Israel. So does that mean negotiations are off the table at this point?
Well, there's very, very difficult relations between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government. There's not much in the way of any negotiations whatsoever. And even whatever security cooperation existed was significantly diminished in recent years. And particularly since this government, the government of Prime Minister Netanyahu, came to power 6 months ago. So this is not a surprise. The Palestinian Authority is greatly hobbled and doesn't have much power in Jenin anyway. So this is really a symbolic move on the part of Mahmoud Abbas. It's relatively meaningless.
Stephen A. Cook of the Council of Foreign Relations in Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks.